The Infinite Spark of Being is completely supported by listeners like you. No ads, no sponsors, just your support. If you want to help keep this going, there are 3 support tiers on Patreon for $10 a month, $15 a month, and $20 a month. No locked content, just a way to say I value this. You can also visit the website to check out books, merch, one-on-one sessions with me. Just click the About button, learn a little bit more about who I am and what I have to offer. And don't forget the YouTube page. That has the podcasts as well as binaural beats that help with meditation, rest, and sleep. So thank you for your support. Let's get started. Welcome to the Infinite Spark of Being podcast. My name is Keith Welsh, and today we're piggybacking off of last week's episode to talk about something that cuts to the bone of what it means to be a human being, and that's addiction. But not just the kind you might be thinking of, not just heroin or alcohol or gambling or porn or anything like that. I'm talking about addiction as the human condition itself, the way we grasp, cling, avoid, and suffer. So even if you don't think this episode is about you, stick around, because this isn't just for people in recovery. This is about what it means to be alive with a mind that is always reaching for something and pushing something else away. And I want to show you how all of us are in some way addicted to our own avoidance of reality. So let's get into it. Addiction and the mind, how craving and avoidance trap us into suffering. We live in a world where addiction is pathologized. It's treated like something that only a certain group of people struggle with. Those people, right? The alcoholics, the junkies, the gamblers, the addicts. But I want to flip that around. What if addiction isn't the exception, but the rule? What if addiction is simply the most visible, most exaggerated version of the grasping and clinging that every single one of us experiences in our own way? Because whether it's a drink or a donut or a text from someone who's really bad for you or just endlessly scrolling through Instagram, it's all the same impulse. This moment isn't enough. I need something else. I can't sit with this. And underneath that is the real problem, a deep disconnection from the self, from the soul, from presence, from awareness. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not just saying that addiction isn't real or serious. It absolutely is. And if you're in recovery and treatment on medication, whatever's helping you stay alive and heal, I love that. I support it. This isn't about replacing treatment with some new aged concept. This is about seeing addiction through a wider lens. However, all of that aside, if the medication is simply you putting a Band-Aid over a sucking chest wound, I'd take a look at that. And if you've already thought that it might be, then it probably is. So addiction is not the disease, it's the symptom. It's a symptom of pain, of trauma, of conditioning. It's a coping mechanism that eventually turns into a cage. In the treatment space, people talk about coping skills. They get into this thing about the difference between coping mechanisms and coping skills. Well, part of the problem is the word coping, right? If someone asked Christy, what's it like to live with Keith? And she said, I'm coping with it, right? Or worse, well, I use a lot of coping skills. It wouldn't be good, right? So why would we want to get through life with coping skills, right? Like, what we want to do is to transform the way the mind relates to life, to reality. So the coping mechanism of addiction starts as a solution and then becomes a problem. But at its core, it's just an extreme reaction to suffering. And suffering is built into the way the mind operates. It's built into the code of the human experience, so to speak. Now, there's a concept in Buddhism called dukkha. It's often translated as suffering, but a better way to understand it is to understand it as this kind of persistent dissatisfaction, like a wheel that doesn't quite sit right on its axle, right? Everything wobbles a little bit. It's always a little off. No matter how good life gets, there's always this faint hum in the background that says, this isn't it. Something's missing. That's dukkha, right? The fear of missing out, FOMO. And how do we usually respond to it? Well, we reach, right? We grasp at things, we chase things, we build identities, we form attachments, we numb ourselves, we distract ourselves, we try to control things. And if those strategies work, if they give us even a second of relief, well, we start to crave them. And the more we crave, the more we cling, and the more we cling, the more we suffer. Why? Because we're clinging to something that the mind believes is stable, fixed, and unchanging. That's the root of suffering. The mind's belief in permanence is constantly rubbing up against the impermanence of life. So let's go deeper. The Buddha talked about the three poisons of the mind. They're craving, aversion, and delusion. And addiction lives right at the intersection of all three of these. So craving would be, I need this thing to feel okay, right? And aversion is, I can't tolerate this feeling. And delusion is, this thing will fix me, whatever that thing is. Now, to be fair, we engage in all three of these all day long to one degree or another, and really it's not that big of a deal until it is. But what you start to see is that this is how we engage with life. And something that I probably need to say at the start of this is these three poisons come with the human birth, as does grasping and clinging. So I don't believe we are ever completely free of them. However, simply being aware that they are there as a fact of life, as a part of the human birth, well, it defangs them, right? They occur, but they don't have the bite they once did. And I don't say that as discouragement, but more as encouragement, right? You'll see it happening in your own mind. You'll see the pushing and pulling, the grasping and clinging, and you'll either be able to work with it, or you'll do like I've done, where you just go, yep, I'm grasping, so strap in, right? We cling, it's okay, just notice it, just acknowledge it. So addiction is really just an attempt, not just, but it is an attempt to exit reality. And it's not always about substances. Obviously, you can be addicted to being needed, right? To being right. You can be addicted to your own victimhood. You can be addicted to your own pain. You can be addicted to the idea of yourself you've been holding on to for decades because you're terrified of what's underneath. And you can be addicted to thinking. And I don't mean just, overthinking. I mean actually addicted to the voice in your head because it's all you've ever known, because silence is terrifying, right? Because presence is so unfamiliar. Because God forbid we ever sit still long enough to actually feel our feelings. One of my favorite lines from The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer is when he says something to the effect that if the voice in your head was your roommate, you'd move out. I love that. Now let's talk about trauma, because we can't really talk about addiction without talking about trauma. Gabor Mate said it best. The question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. He believes that all addiction is the result of trauma. I don't know if I fully agree. I don't agree, but he's a smart guy, and you should read his book, The Realm of the Hungry Ghost, especially if you work with addicts. Or you could do like most clinicians and just never read a single fucking word once you get out of college, because God knows what we learn as a culture and what you can learn about yourself stops after college graduation. It's probably actually, it is more important that after a hard day's work, you just go home and stare at that flat glass God at the front of your living room and just watch Netflix and forget about your day. That's probably best. I digress. So addiction is what happens when the nervous system is dysregulated, so overwhelmed that it grabs onto anything that will bring it relief. Any sense of control, safety, or stillness. If you grew up in chaos, right? If you were neglected or abused or constantly walking on eggshells, then substances or behaviors or even fantasies become your lifeline, and eventually they become your poison. And this is why I get frustrated when people moralize addiction or talk about it like it's this failure of fucking willpower. It's not. It's a failure of connection. It's a failure of safety, a failure of compassion. And if you've never experienced that kind of inner pain, well, good for you. But don't you dare judge someone who has. You can get frustrated. I understand that, especially if they're family or somebody very close to you, and you can get angry. But please don't think that you would have done it differently because you don't know. So what do? Right? We start by understanding that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. That doesn't mean that you won't feel pain. Life is painful. Things fall apart. People die. You'll get your heart broken. You'll get sick. Your car will break down. The dog's going to throw up on the rug rather than tile. But suffering is what happens when we resist the pain. When we say this shouldn't be happening, when we fight reality, when we try to escape the moment instead of meeting it. And addiction, in any form of it, is simply about trying to bypass that pain. It's about numbing instead of noticing. It's about escaping instead of experiencing, controlling instead of surrendering. But here's the good news. That gap, right? That tiny space between the impulse and the reaction is the doorway to freedom. As Viktor Frankl said, this space between stimulus and response. That's what spiritual practice is. That's what meditation is. It's not about becoming a monk or giving up coffee or pretending to be calm all the time. It's about training the mind to pause, to become aware, to see the pattern as it's happening and to choose something different. And it's not easy. Right? The mind is slippery. Your thoughts will justify anything. It's like, I've had a hard day. I deserve this. Just one more time. I can quit tomorrow. There's always, I'll quit on Monday. I've heard people say that on Tuesday or Wednesday. But awareness cuts through all of that. Awareness is the knife that severs the illusion. It's the imagery of the sword in Buddhism, right? That cuts through to the truth of things. So what do? How do we create enough space that we have the ability to choose actions, to choose thoughts, and more importantly, learn to disregard the urges of the nervous system? Well, here's what I'll tell you. First, you have to get honest. And I mean really honest. We talked a little bit about this last week. Where are you clinging? What are you addicted to? And it's not just substances. Again, it's thoughts, patterns, roles, relationships, ideas, identities, and run it through the filter of the three poisons. The three poisons in Buddhism that we discussed earlier: craving, aversion, delusion. What is it you need in order to feel okay? What feelings or thoughts can't you tolerate? And what is it that you believe will make it all better? In other words, what is it that you grasp for to counter the thoughts and the feelings that you can't tolerate, right? What is it you believe will fix everything? Second, get curious. What is the addiction doing for you, right? What's the payoff? What's the feeling that you're trying to avoid? A question that you could ask yourself is, when I'm not engaged with the addiction, whatever that addictive behavior is, what don't I feel, right? Like, to be simple about it, when I'm drunk, what don't I feel, right? Now, it's important to note that while everything we do as humans can be linked back to those three poisons, as they are essentially biological imperatives, you know what's an addiction and what's not an addiction, right? You know what typically results in separation and isolation and what results in closeness, happiness, and joy. You know what those things are. So just, again, get curious about it. Look at it. Don't be afraid of it. Third, build awareness. Start meditating. Start journaling. Start sitting with yourself instead of running from yourself. Even if it's just a few minutes a day, build the muscle of mindfulness so you can see your mind clearly. And this is where journaling can be a vital practice. This is there's something about your eyes seeing your thoughts, right? Your eyes looking at them. When we can see the unskillful thinking on a piece of paper, the unskillfulness really gets driven home. Like, you can see how crazy it is, right? And the mind lets go of that thought as an option much quicker. And when the thought is no longer an option, it stops manifesting in physical reality. And finally, get connected, Talk to someone, a friend, a coach, a group, a higher power. Addiction thrives in isolation. Freedom happens in connection. I have a dear friend named Troy, and he always says the opposite of addiction is connection. Now, I want to say this as well. If you've relapsed or you're deep in it right now, or you're, carrying shame about your past, you're not broken. You're not weak. You're a human. This stuff is built into the code, right? And those people that judge you, they just got lucky. That being said, you don't have to keep living the way you have been living, right? I've seen too many miracles to believe that miracles can't happen, right? I've been proven wrong too many times not to believe that anything is possible. You just need persistence and consistency, and being human, it's hard. It's weird. But it's also sacred. It's also beautiful. And you don't have to stay stuck in that loop. You can step out of it. And maybe it's only one breath at a time, one day at a time, one decision at a time, whatever. But you don't have to wait for rock bottom. Stop using that for an excuse. And some of you that are, I've seen people like, well, I'll quit when I hit rock bottom. Right? You can make the choice now. You can choose awareness. You can choose presence. You can choose to feel what you've been avoiding, and in that, you'll find that you were running from something that was never that scary. I mean, ultimately, this is a perception issue. And, you're more than welcome to perceive this thing any way you wish, but I would just like to offer you another way to look at it. I often find that if we adjust our position, our stance slightly, we see something else. It's the way a cylinder goes from being a circle to a rectangle, depending on how you look at the thing. So I would like to offer you this. Addiction isn't the enemy. It's the teacher. It shows us where we've been hurt, where we've disconnected, where we've believed lies about ourselves, where we've abandoned the present for the future, and in some case, we've abandoned the present moment for the past. So many that I've worked with over the years found that the life they had after working through their addiction was better than the life they had previously, and is always better than they could have imagined. And when I ask, would you have these wonderful experiences in this beautiful life had you not gone through all of that? They always reply no. On some level, it was all necessary. And some of these people have had pain that most cannot imagine, but still they had to go through it. It makes no logical earthly sense, but on a spiritual level, on the level of the divinely ordered, it makes sense. So to piggyback further on last week's episode, what would you call an invisible force in your life that has always guided you? It's guided you from one experience to another. Though at times the experiences felt pointless or humiliating or painful, almost like a mother or father guiding a child, pushing them to do something that, while in the moment made them cry, made them scream and kick and whatever, at the end, it was all necessary. Well, you might call that invisible force God, or a higher power, divine guidance. So on some level, addiction, pain, suffering, they become that thing. You start flipping through your life and you realize that it was all necessary. It was all perfect. Yes, loss hurts, but it hurts because the mind clings, and the mind is supposed to cling. And then you start to realize that without that clinging, the pain of loss isn't there. And without the pain of loss, the sweetness of the next thing isn't there either. The freshness isn't there. The newness isn't there. And so you start to see, oh my God, it's all perfect. And that's when laying in the river and flowing with the river makes sense. Whether it's good or bad, pleasure or pain, you say, thank you, God, for taking care of it. But the truth is, there is no better moment than this one. And once you see that, once you really taste that, that grip starts to loosen. And it's not overnight, and it's not perfect, but it happens steadily. And that is the path back to yourself, capital S, the path back to that infinite spark of being that's always been in there. So if this spoke to you, share it with someone who might need it. If you want to support the work, check out the website, the Patreon. or come to the free Sunday night meditations. All the links are in the show notes or at theinfinitesparkofbeing.com. I love you. I love you. I love you. Thank you, God, for taking care of it. Thank you, God, for taking care of it. Thank you, God, for taking care of it. If the Infinite Spark of Being has brought you any value, consider supporting the work. You can join the Patreon for $10, $15, or $20 a month. It's a simple way to keep this project going with no ads, no fluff, just us. You can also head to theinfinitesparkofbeing.com for books, merch, one-on-one sessions with me. Just click the About button, learn a little bit more about what I do. Also, check out the YouTube channel for episodes and binaural beats that help with meditation, rest, and sleep. I love you. Thank you. Take care. See you next week.